There's a monument in Moscow that most people walk past without knowing what it really means. It's a statue of a dog, standing on a rocket, looking up at the stars. Her name was Laika, and in 1957 she became the first living creature to orbit the Earth. But here's what they didn't tell the world for over 40 years. She was never meant to come back. The scientists knew it, the government knew it, and the man who strapped her into that rocket, he knew it too. This isn't just a story about space exploration. It's about what we're willing to sacrifice for progress. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Laika's story still haunts us today. It all started in Moscow, 1956. The city was buried in winter, the kind of cold that didn't just freeze your hands, it crawled into your bones. The streets were full of dogs just trying to make it through the night, small, hungry, always moving, always looking for something to eat or somewhere to hide from the wind. One of them was a little husky Spitz mix, about 3 years old, barely 13 pounds. Her fur was white and brown, and her eyes were the kind that made you stop for a second. Big, calm, and trusting, even after everything she'd been through. She had no home, no collar, no one calling her name. She was just one of those stray dogs that people barely notice. But that was exactly why she was chosen. Because at that time, Soviet scientists were looking for dogs for a new kind of mission, one no human had ever tried. They didn't want pampered pets or well-fed show dogs. They wanted survivors, dogs that already knew what hunger felt like, dogs that had slept through cold nights and learned how to stay calm in chaos. And that's how she was found and chosen to become the first living creature to orbit the Earth. One ordinary day, she was picked up from the streets and taken to a strange building filled with people in white coats. She didn't know it yet, but that moment would change her life forever. The scientists gave her a name, Kudryavka, which means little curly in Russian because of her soft fur. Later, during a radio test, she barked into the microphone and everyone laughed. From that day on, they called her Laika, which simply means barker, and that name stayed with her all the way to space. Inside the facility, Laika's life became strange. The people there started putting her through crazy routines she couldn't understand. They placed her in cages that kept getting smaller each week, training her to stay calm in tight spaces. Then came the spinning machines called centrifuges that tossed her around to mimic the rough forces of a rocket taking off. They even blasted loud noises and strong vibrations around her so she'd get used to the chaos of launch. It was harsh, almost cruel, but Laika never fought back. She adjusted to everything. The scientists began to notice something special about her. No matter how uncomfortable or scared she must have been, she stayed calm, quiet and still. One researcher, Vladimir Yazdovsky, wrote in his journal, Laika was quiet and charming. He even brought her home one night, just before the mission, let her play with his children, gave her a good meal, let her run around the house. He later said, I wanted to do something nice for her. She had so little time left to live. He knew. They all knew. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik 1, the first man-made satellite to ever orbit the Earth. The news spread everywhere. People were amazed, but in America, it was a moment of pure embarrassment. The Soviets had beaten them to space. That single event kicked off what became known as the space race, a race not just for science but for pride and power. And the Soviet leader at the time, Nikita Khrushchev, wanted to take it even further. He didn't just want another satellite. He wanted to send a living creature into space to prove Soviet dominance once and for all. The problem? He demanded it be done in 1 month. That deadline changed everything. The engineers had no time to design a way to bring the spacecraft back safely. They could launch something into orbit, but not return it to Earth alive. Still, Khrushchev didn't care. He wanted results, fast. With the deadline closing in, the engineers got to work. They designed a new spacecraft called Sputnik 2, and this one wasn't made for equipment or instruments. It was made for a dog. Inside, there was barely any space to move. Just a small, cramped metal capsule with padded walls, a life support system, a tiny harness to keep the dog in place, and a feeding device that squeezed out food in gel form. It was enough to keep an animal alive for a short while, but not enough to bring it back. Then came the hardest part, choosing who would go. They had trained 3 dogs, Laika, Albina, and Mushka. Albina had just given birth to puppies, and the scientists couldn't bear to send her. Mushka was kept for ground testing, and that left only one choice, Laika. The small stray from Moscow's streets was about to make history, but she'd never return home. On November 3, 1957, the day finally came. Technicians gently placed Laika inside the tiny metal capsule of Sputnik 2. They attached small sensors all over her body to track her heartbeat, her breathing, and her blood pressure. Then they sealed the hatch shut. From that moment on, Laika was alone. The official plan sounded simple enough. She would orbit the Earth for a few days while the scientists collected data. Her oxygen system was built to last about a week, and her automatic feeder was programmed to do the same. After that, the next portion of her food would contain a chemical meant to put her to sleep, so the world would believe she died peacefully. At least, that's what they told the public. But the truth was something else entirely. The night before the launch, the team was quiet. One scientist, Oleg Gazenko, later said, "The more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it. We shouldn't have done it. We did not learn enough from the mission to justify the death of the dog." Another researcher admitted, "We knew we were sending her to her death, but we told ourselves it was for science, for progress, for humanity." Vladimir Yazdovsky, the man who brought Laika home that one night, wrote, "I asked her to forgive us, and I even cried as I stroked her for the last time." These weren't monsters. They were scientists, people who loved animals, people who had spent months with Laika, training her, feeding her, watching her trust them. And now they were strapping her into a rocket, knowing she would never come back. There were protests. Even before the launch, animal rights groups in Britain and the United States condemned the mission. The National Canine Defense League called it deplorable. People marched outside the Soviet embassy in London with signs. But it didn't matter. The mission was already in motion. On the morning of November 3, 1957, the rocket sat on the launch pad at Baikonur Cosmodrome. Inside, Laika waited in the dark. Technicians ran final checks. Engineers monitored her vitals. Her heart rate was elevated, triple the normal rate. She was terrified. And then, at 5:30 a.m., the engines ignited. The rocket lifted off. G-forces slammed into Laika's small body, 5 times the force of gravity. Her heart rate spiked. Her breathing became rapid, shallow. But she survived the launch. For a few minutes, she was in orbit, weightless, floating in the capsule, the first living creature to see Earth from space. Her vital signs began to stabilize. Her heart rate dropped. She was calming down. And then something went wrong. The thermal control system failed. The capsule was supposed to regulate temperature, keeping it cool enough for Laika to survive, but a piece of the rocket didn't separate properly. Heat from the sun, combined with the malfunction, caused the temperature inside to rise. It climbed to 40 degrees Celsius, over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Laika's heart rate spiked again. Her breathing became erratic, and within 5 to 7 hours of launch, she died. Not from poison, not peacefully in her sleep after 7 days. She died from overheating and stress, alone, terrified, in the dark. But the Soviet Union didn't tell anyone. For days they released statements saying Laika was alive and well, that she was eating, that her vital signs were normal. They even said she was comfortable, which was all a lie. By November 10th, the spacecraft's batteries finally ran out. The life support system shut down. But by that time, Laika had already been gone for days. Still, Sputnik 2 kept circling the Earth over and over again, silently passing above the planet she'd never return to. It stayed up there for nearly 5 months, making more than 2,500 orbits around the world. Then, on April 14th, 1958, the capsule finally re-entered Earth's atmosphere. It burned up completely as it fell, taking what was left of Laika's tiny ship with it. When Sputnik 2 burned up, Laika's body was completely destroyed. There was nothing left of her, not even debris that could fall back to Earth. For the next 40 years, the Soviet Union kept repeating the same story, that Laika had lived for a full week in space and died peacefully, without pain. People all over the world believed it. But in 2002, decades later, a Russian scientist named Dmitry Malyshenkov finally told the truth at a conference in Houston. He revealed that Laika didn't survive even a single day. She died within hours of launch, from extreme heat and panic inside the capsule. For more than 40 years, the world had been living with a lie. So, why does Laika's story still matter today? Because her death actually changed everything. It proved something no one knew for sure back then, that a living creature could survive the violent launch into space and float in zero gravity without instantly dying. That single mission became the foundation for human spaceflight. Just 4 years later, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to go into space, and unlike Laika, he made it back home alive. Everything that came after, the Apollo missions, the moon landing, even the International Space Station, all trace back to what scientists learned from Laika's flight. But her story also changed something else: ethics. After Laika, the world began asking harder questions. Is it right to send animals to die for science? Where do we draw the line between progress and cruelty? Today, space agencies have strict protocols. Animals used in research are protected by laws. Missions are designed with the intent to bring them back alive. Laika's death forced humanity to confront the cost of exploration. In 2008, over 50 years after her death, Russia unveiled a monument in her honor. It stands outside the military research facility where she was trained. It shows Laika standing on a rocket, looking up, not in fear, but in trust, because that's what she gave them, trust. She trusted the people who fed her, who trained her, who strapped her into that capsule, and they sent her to die. Laika didn't choose to be a hero. She didn't volunteer. She was just a stray dog who got picked up off the street and became a symbol of human ambition, and she paid for it with her life. So here's what I learned from Laika's story. Progress always has a cost, and sometimes that cost is carried by those who have no choice in the matter. Laika didn't ask to go to space, but she went anyway, and because of her, we learned. We advanced. We reached the stars. But we also learned something else, that some sacrifices are too great, that some prices shouldn't be paid. Laika's story is a reminder that every leap forward leaves something behind, and we should never forget what or who we left behind to get here. If this story moved you, please subscribe to my little channel, because there are more stories like this, stories that need to be told.